My name is Craig. Welcome to my first podcast, Cutting the Crap with Shap. Thank you so much for being here and checking it out. I will simply say, and you'll hear me say this multiple times, I'd love for you to be on the podcast if you're interested. Please let me know. You'll see something at the end to kind of let me know you're interested. But for this first podcast, I'm blessed to be here with my good friend Blake Meritz. So I've known Blake for a relatively long time. He was actually a student where I teach at William Penn High School, but I was never fortunate enough to ever have him. We just got close. I guess just because our values are so similar, we got close in high school. We've stayed close, and if I could say a few things about Blake, he is somebody who has incredible uh, values, dignity, incredibly hardworking and dedicated. And if more people were kind of like him, um, our world would be a better place. That there's no doubt about that. People who know Blake would say the same thing. He has an amazing family. So with that out of the way, Blake, how you doing, brother?
I'm great. It's an honor to be here. And first episode, the debut, it means the world. Appreciate it. Very excited to cut the crap with Mr. Shap. And you made me sound pretty incredible there. I appreciate that. I'm gonna have to bring you around with me everywhere I go.
Well, it's all
That would be
true
pretty
though.
nice.
It's all
Appreciate
true.
that.
It's all true. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Went
Where's
to William Penn High School. I'm from Southampton, Pennsylvania. As I mentioned, same area as Mr. Shapiro. Um, Went to college at University of Pennsylvania. Was there for 4 years in Philadelphia. Now I'm working in New York City. 23 years old, adjusting to life here, enjoying it. Just trying, and I view myself as a pretty positive person, which is probably why I'm here today. Hopefully we
yes,
can talk a little bit about that as well.
awesome. I appreciate it, Blake. So Blake and I were, we've obviously talked for years, and before we hopped on this first podcast, we kind of discussed some different topics. And there's a broad range of things. And I'm going to ask him some questions. I'm sure he'll ask me some questions. It'll be very free flowing. I hope you get something out of it in a positive way. So here we go. I guess my first question to you is, like, knowing you in high school, how would you say you were so together?
Well, appreciate the compliment. Thank you. I think I was very fortunate. I thought William Tennant provided an incredible opportunity to students that, there were so many different things to get involved in. And, you know, coming into high school, I don't know if you remember being a middle schooler, but it's a bit scary. Like there's
Mhm.
lots of changes happening for us. There were many elementary schools coming into a new middle school, things, popularity starts to become a thing, and you kind of start to realize in social settings that things are a bit different. While you're super hormonal, things feel a little bit weird. Um, and then high school is this opportunity, at least where I grew up, where there are two middle schools coming together. There's an opportunity to meet tons of new people while people are all maturing. Um, and like I said, a lot of opportunities available. So I feel like one thing that I was always told to do by my parents, by some older people I knew in the neighborhood, was always just to get involved. And I know that's something that you always say to students is to get
Mhm.
involved. And I think that helps create baby steps to take things one at a time where you start to get more comfortable with yourself, to build a little bit of confidence by putting yourself out there and kind of just build from there. And like I said, credit to a lot of the people who gave me a lot of that advice. My parents were huge on that. I have a few like aunts and uncles who have some kids as well. One with kids in high school already, and they kind of gave me that advice. And I think that served me well. Like I joined at the very beginning of high school. There was an opportunity to run for class officer where I had to record a speech that I was super nervous for under bright lights, sweating through my dress shirt. I was like squinting because I thought that the person who was recording in BWTV, which is the recording station at our school, told me that I was like I had smiling eyes, so I thought that doing this meant I was smiling with my eyes, and I kind of just embarrassed myself a little bit and realized that at that point, you don't need to care what people think. I didn't get teased for it. People were very nice, and even if they were, like sometimes you just gotta have enough, just put yourself out there and test yourself in terms of being confident in yourself.
Yeah, I think that's. I love how you said you got to put yourself out there, and the smiling eyes was very funny. So how do you think your
Try
how
not
do
to do that right now.
you, how do you think your like high school experience? I remember when you got accepted to Penn. How do you feel like all your experiences in high school, how you put yourself out there? How did that translate to college?
Yeah, definitely. And high school and college are very different. You know, I and Penn was something, I'm very fortunate to have that experience, where it was very different than Tenet. Tenet public school, um, lots of different people, pretty diverse in terms of basically everything. You get all sorts of like religions, personalities, ethnicities, and you get that at Penn too. But it was a lot of people who were maybe more private school oriented, a little bit more status oriented. So it was definitely an adjustment from a social side of things, but also academically, it's different being in classrooms with lots of people who might be a bit intimidating if you think about it too hard from maybe a competition intellectual type of standpoint. I'm not super competitive, so that part didn't really translate too much into my mentality, but definitely like we've kind of discussed at length in the past, it's all about kind of the habits that you build, um, and again, it's all starting small, where you just get practice, develop some momentum, and eventually it just becomes like the disciplined, like on autopilot type of thing. But that's all kind of, I mentioned to you before, in my room I have this whiteboard where it starts with intention, then I'm looking at it right now, intention, organization, then there's action and staying disciplined, and then being positive and focused. So I think it all starts from having an intention of, I want to achieve this in school, whether that's join this club, do well in this class, meet this professor so that they can teach me this. And then being organized about all of those different goals so that you know what to do when, what habits you need to form so that you can achieve those goals. And then it's a matter of just doing it, staying disciplined. In college, there's obviously a lot more distraction. You're living on your own. Maybe you have a roommate and you might stay up 2 hours later talking than you mean to. Um, and there's not to say there's not room for spontaneity because that's part of college, like very different than high school where you're not structured and you kind of have to make your own structure, but there's also an opportunity to be a little bit free spirited and meet lots of really cool people, which is probably the main value of college. But um, there's still something to be said for maintaining your own structure so that you can achieve the goals that you have.
You find that and this is something I'm going to be interested to hear what you said. How do you, when you were especially at Penn, and even after you graduated Penn, I know you're working now. How do you find a way to avoid the negative noise that comes around you?
Yeah, negative noise I feel like can take shape in a bunch of different ways. Maybe how I first think about it is, what other people might say or just like different things that are occurring in your life that might deter you from something, whether, that's stress from a class that don't feel like you're doing, that you're not grasping the concepts. Um, I think something that we talk about all the time is positivity, and I think there's something to be said for not pretending and being like, okay, like everything is unicorns and rainbows and convincing yourself of
Right.
something, but more so just the more that I grow older, like I'm 23 years old, so I still have so much to learn and experience. But I feel like barring anything intensely like catastrophic that happens, you can really just dictate your mind in terms of how you perceive things. And um, sometimes you might feel very stressed, and you got to tell your mind like, hey, I got to swing the pendulum the other way. Be grateful for things that happen. Like overall, everything will be okay and work out in the long run. And sometimes that in and of itself will take a bit of an edge off, allow you to focus and you know dial into what really matters. But there there is an aspect of removing some of the emotion from it, thinking logically about what exactly it is that you're trying to achieve. You know, experience some emotion, but at a certain point in time, just sit down, get into a bit of like a flow state, and just analyze your problems and attack it, and then create an action plan, like I was saying, organize, and then go for it.
Yeah, I think that can be so hard for people, because you're lucky enough and also, I guess, aware enough to be able to do those things. I think there's, oftentimes in not just in work but in society in general, people will have something negative that happens in their life, and it might not even be a big thing, but they kind of like run with it. Like it's the woe is me.
Absolutely.
It's like the woe is me, syndrome. Like, oh, this happened and then this happened, and then before you know it, it's very hard to kind of break that narrative, because you feel like it keeps coming. And I think what you're speaking about is, not allowing a little thing to become a really big thing, you know,
Absolutely.
which we hear all the time. I mean, that's not like a Shap and Blake thing. People have talked about that so many times. Like, but it's hard though. It's hard because our normal lives, like if you think about just a normal day, right? Like our normal days just go. Like they're just normal. Doesn't
Status
mean
quo. Yeah.
right, exactly. Then they can be a decent day. Things can be going pretty well, but it's nothing, let's say, special. You know what I mean? Like it's just there, status quo, and then something happens, even if it's a small thing. Somebody cuts you off in traffic, something stupid like that, or maybe somebody says something to you that offends you, or maybe your day at work or something wasn't perfect. And a lot of times, I've seen this very often is people will kind of forget that most of their day was going decent, status quo, and they had this little hiccup, you know,
Yeah.
and you
A
can't
lot
let
of
the hic.
people definitely over index on just whatever went wrong. They fixate on that for sure.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. Like, yeah, you kind of, and but again, like you and I might do that, but I think how do we help people so they don't do it? I guess is the question.
And we both do it too, like
Mhm.
like you mentioned. But it's a matter of trying to recognize things when they happen. Like nobody's going to be the perfect person. You got to give yourself a little bit of grace. Like you might even have large periods of time when you're in a funk. That doesn't mean like you're a bad person or you're a loser and you're not achieving your goals. Like I'm a big David Goggins fan. I know, I
Yeah.
think we've spoken about
Yep.
him, and
Yep.
he can be a bit over the top on some things where like I don't know if I want to have his mentality every single second of every single day. Like I'd like to enjoy some things. And for people who aren't familiar, he's like a Navy SEAL who's like all about being hard and making life as challenging as possible, frequently doing like 100-mile super marathons and challenging his mind. And there's something to be said for getting mentally tough, um, but I think it's a bit of that mentality where like with Goggins, like he was 300 pounds and he lost a ton of weight to train for Navy SEALs, and he ended up being able to do it after like having an intensely hard life, and ended up putting it back all that weight, and that didn't make him a loser. Just like start from scratch and you start again and prove to yourself that you can overcome challenges. But yeah, I think like not over fixating on negative things that happen. There's the power of positivity, and that's something that I've learned from many different people. I would say you're up there in the top one, two, three people that has introduced the concept to me, but also like kept it present in my mind. We've had the great fortune of staying in touch
Hmm.
relatively frequently post college. Post high school. I'm now 6 years essentially out of college, and here we are
Yeah.
filming the first episode, baby, cutting the crap with Shap. Um, but it's important to, you know, life kind of moves in swings, like, and without getting too like philosophical, I feel like it's all about balance. Like, you can some sometimes you can focus on having a lot of ambition. Sometimes you want to focus on being more grateful. You don't want to stress yourself out too much with ambition, or you also sometimes don't want to just focus only on being grateful, and then you're not going to have any goals to achieve, And I think that's just one example, but when everyday things come up that lead you to experience negative emotion, that's just going to one side of the pendulum. You just gotta have this reminder in your mentality that always kind of brings you back to the center.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the centerpiece I think is key, and I love that you mentioned David Goggins. Even though I will say I think like that's the kind of thing where I've always believed um, that we shouldn't try to emulate people. I think we should try to be our own best people. Doesn't mean we can't admire and respect what other people do. I mean, as an educator, there's other educators who I have a great deal of respect for. Even as a competitive powerlifter, there are people that I follow that I admire their talents, but I don't try to emulate them. I try to be the best version of myself. Which I think
Absolutely,
is,
yeah,
yeah, has incredible value, and I see that a lot in the given society. Like, be the best version of Blake or be the best version of Shap. Don't be the best version of somebody else, because then you're not true to who you are. It's great to be able to see what other people are doing and be inspired. That's what I'd say.
absolutely, yeah,
I think it's great to be inspired, but at the end of the day, you've got to do what is going to work for you, not what's going to necessarily work for them, because our brains are wired so differently. Our levels of motivation, or honestly, our levels of willingness to fail are greatly different from person to person. I don't really like I don't really like the term fail, but I'll just say our abilities to not necessarily be as successful as we'd hoped initially are going to change from person to person. I think you have to be willing to step back and take a bigger lens, which is
yeah, absolutely, yeah. There are definitely different levels of risk that people are interested in accepting. I I think like it's great if you can try to take as much healthy risk as possible to get yourself out of the comfort zone. I know that's something we've talked about a lot, but I agree. Like, you don't want to fit and try to make yourself into somebody that is not you, no matter who they are. Like, I think I view both of my parents as incredible people, and I feel inspired by aspects of them, but I'm growing up in a different time, and even if I wasn't growing up in a different time as them, like, you can't try to become exactly who they are. Like, you gotta leave some room to experience things for yourself and kind of use your own instincts and become your own person and allow yourself to try things that maybe they wouldn't do or act in a certain way. Just being able to think for yourself and be a little bit more, I don't know, independent minded than just using like a certain stereotype of what you think someone who you would idolize might do.
mm, I love that. Yeah, I know one of the things we've talked a lot about, and this is something that I think we both share, is how would you define your moral compass?
I hopefully clear. I think I was so I just talked about how, like, I don't want to be exactly like my parents to a T, but there are definitely things that they've instilled in me growing up at an early age that have molded me into the person I am, and that's, I think, an incredible thing, and I feel extremely fortunate to have, in my eyes, the best parents in the world. And so that's definitely shaped my moral compass. And over time you get exposed to new situations, and there are different ways of testing your moral compass and your integrity to uphold the different things that you tell yourself you believe. But I guess some of the things that they've taught me are just some of the standard things that all like sound great, but it's more about like how you live your life to, like I said, uphold some of those values. But just in my mind, being a good person is maybe probably the paramount thing that you can do in life, honestly. I don't know. You can have like goals that you want to achieve, but I think I would much rather be a good person than, I don't know, earn X amount of money, or for instance, just having integrity, thinking about how other people are feeling, and doing your best to maybe improve somebody's day, or help somebody out. I know something that we spoke about in as it relates to, maybe middle school, high school students, is be the type of person where you're going to invite somebody over to the table that you're sitting at if you see that they might be alone and feeling a bit overwhelmed, or in their own head about how they're being perceived. But I'm sure I'll kick it back to you, but I'm sure we'll get to talk about this a lot more. I don't want to ramble on about that.
No, that's okay. No, I think the stuff you said though is really important. Like being a good person, treating people the right way. That's. I mean, look. Obviously, I think the same thing. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have stayed connected as we have.
Absolutely.
The moral compass of things I talk about at work often is how do we conduct ourselves? Like what makes us who we are as a person? And I know you talked about like the integrity piece, which is so important. Just to have integrity, how we treat others. Um, Here's another thing I'd ask you is like, how does your attitude, like you as a person, or maybe a better way to put it is, how do our attitudes influence how other people see us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a few things, and I can come back to some points also just generally on moral compass, but I think a few things. One, like I try my best not to worry too much about what other people think, because I think if you keep that in your mind too much, then you start to it can start to take control over who your behavior, and you're not really like acting naturally. Like you're kind of just always worried about what other people are thinking, then in your own head about it, and you're going to not be your authentic self. But at the same time, making an intentional effort to be kind to people, especially in high school, you're coming into contact with so many different people throughout the day. Like you never know what somebody might be thinking. Like if you see somebody in the hallway and you say, "Hey, how you doing?" Like, I don't know, I like your shirt, like give them a compliment. You could change their entire day. Maybe they came to work or work. Now I'm like in the
You
post
can talk
college graduate
about work.
mindset,
That's
but
okay.
yeah. But I going down the example I was saying, school, work, whatever. Maybe if you gave someone a compliment about something, you don't know what happened before school or work. Maybe they're having a hard day. Maybe they're going through something they don't want to talk about with anybody, and that compliment changed their entire day and their outlook. Maybe now they're more set to deal with their own problems, or ready to spread positivity to someone else. And people have different personalities. Like maybe you're not the most outgoing person to begin with, and maybe that's not even like something that you're trying to become more of, but there's still things that you can do to portray and exude a bit of a positive attitude that helps others. And I think in today's society, probably people might think like, why does it even matter? Like
Hmm.
that's they're their own independent person. I have my thing. I can deal with myself. I kind of want to stay in my own lane. Like it's a lot of that in New York City now. I think I was saying that's like where I moved to, and it's definitely a bit different than like in a intimate high school where you're like seeing people that you run into frequently. But and like yeah, maybe it's true. New York City, for instance, you don't want to go saying hi to everybody on the street. People are gonna maybe think that you're a bit of a threat. So understanding a bit of like the
That's
scenario,
true.
but um, when it calls for it, like being nice to people can go a long way. And I find personally that it makes me feel great selfishly about myself, and like kind of builds momentum for me to be social in another atmosphere, or to just feel energized to achieve whatever it is that I'm trying to do that day. I don't know. I think I feel great about that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes right into the issue of I remember when you were in high school, and one of the things that really struck me, and I'm not going to say you're the only student I've ever had or I've ever known who's done this, because you're not. There's other students who've done it, but one of the things that it struck me that you had an immense amount of courage, because and
Appreciate that.
this is not just for young people. I think it's just people in general, because I've heard you say multiple times during our time together about putting yourself out there. That is hard. That's courage. It's hard to do that, because no matter who we are, even both of us, who I would say both are a confident young man and a confident older man.
No, no, come on now. You're the one who's lifting way more than I am.
I was going to say old, but
A,
I
a
stopped
few
my.
a few pounds a few pounds lighter too, if I might add.
um,
From a
I
body weight
think
standpoint, from the weight
right.
standpoint. Go
I
ahead,
think
go ahead. I'm done.
I think um, both of us have courage. We're both kind of willing to put ourselves out there in a way that hopefully impacts people in a positive way. And before we got on here, you were asking me like, you know, what's the goal? What do we hope to achieve? And those kind of important questions. And I said something along the lines of, being a young person, how old are you now? 23?
23, yep.
Yeah, 23. So how do you, I guess, how would you inspire young people to lead and to do it the right way?
Yeah. I think I think there are a bunch of parts to that based on like a bit of the background that you're giving too. I think, and leading takes a lot of courage, like you said. So I think the main point there that you mentioned is courage, and courage doesn't necessarily mean that you're confident, at least especially in the beginning. I think it can definitely help build confidence, but and this also ties into some of the moral compass things that we were discussing, because it doesn't always, it's not easy to just follow your moral compass. If it is, everybody would be viewed as saints. Like there are
Yep.
different points in time where it might be going against the grain to have some integrity, be a bit of a leader, and you might not feel like you have the confidence to do it, especially maybe, if you're a young person, like we were mentioning, maybe a freshman in high school, you don't feel like you've adapted to the social dynamics of the school yet. What are you going to do to be a leader? Maybe you can be thinking to yourself. But I think it all comes with having a sense of your moral compass and who you are going in, where you have an idea like, okay, like for instance, maybe I want to get involved in this in school, and I want to act in this way if I were to see something that I didn't believe was right. Like I'm going to force myself to speak up, even if it's in a group of people I don't feel most confident like sharing my opinion with. And once you tell yourself, I guess, kind of to be automatic, where like if something happens, you're going to force yourself to do it, then that can help build confidence. Once you go through the first time, you see like, okay, I have this voice. Like even if you feel like maybe you get a bit shot down, like now you have the experience trying something for the first time, and that you can help build confidence that way. And it kind of also makes you feel a bit more competent in terms of maybe like speaking up, or if you're trying something new, whether that's like a hard class, or like getting involved in school, being like an officer or something, or joining a new club, like you feel a bit more confident as you get more exposed to something, which leads to confidence down the line. But I guess as far as like being a leader goes, you some people might think also like, what's the value in being a leader? Like
Hmm.
why do they need to do it? But I think it's also just all about how you view yourself. And maybe some people might say, on one hand, like being a leader, you might feel like you have too much of an ego, but on the other hand, you could say like even being an ego might having an ego might not even be the worst thing in the world always, as long as you keep it in check. But I think it's all about like how you perceive yourself. And I don't know, my dad always told me like, you're a natural born leader. I did karate as a child, and that kind of like helped instill
Hmm.
leadership values in me growing up. And so I was always told, leader, leader, leader. So I viewed myself as a leader. And maybe that's not something that a lot of people are growing up like lucky enough to have. And I think, not to say that you can't become one. Like it's all about like what you tell yourself. Um, but yeah, maybe got a little bit sidetracked there. But I think long-winded way of saying like it's all about having an idea of who you want to be, and making a contract, an agreement with yourself that when the opportunity arises, you're going to act in a certain way, no matter how scared you feel about it, and then take it from there. And then it'll become easier.
I love the contract piece. That's a that's something that is I love that, and again, people have talked about that before. I think when it comes to making a contract, especially for people that might be inherently a little hesitant, the contract has to be something that's going to be achievable. Like
Definitely.
it can't be something that's so well. We talk about smart goals and those kinds of things, but really it comes down to is, and I always kind of give the analogy to students is, and I'll look at it from, let's say, a powerlifting standpoint, is, if I've done, let's say, 1,000 pounds and I have a competition coming up, it's totally unrealistic for me to say I'm going to go from 1,000 to 1,500.
Exactly. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And I'll say this to not just students, but other adults, people that I help, coach. Doesn't matter how much I want that. Like when people say, "Oh,
Absolutely.
you can do whatever you want," that's BS. That's actually not true. You can't do whatever you want. Like that's like me saying, "Well, you know what? I want to be a professional golfer." Well, I don't golf. Like you know, it, I know at this point in my life I can't be a professional golfer. So I think there are limits, and also being aware of, if I say, "Hey, I did 1,000 pounds and I want to do 1,500," that is not going to work for me, and it's going to be harder for me to become a leader because the task is so daunting. Like
Definitely.
the task that we have at
Exactly.
hand
100%.
when it comes to developing those leadership skills, we're all starting at different levels. You might be starting here, I might be starting here, somebody else might be here. There has got to be, in my experiences, there's got to be something. You said that contract. Well, for me, the contract might be something that I am going to go to the gym X times a week to get to that next level.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that I will get there, but I'm signing a contract with myself that I'm going to put myself in that position. I think that's something that people struggle with because they look at the end game, you know, they look at the end
Exactly.
game and miss the process to getting there, because the process getting there is critical. It's like before we got on our podcast, we were talking about, like I was saying, I was sick and the lifting. It's the process of getting to there that is most important. And if you do steps A, B, C, D, E, you have a much greater chance of getting into that leadership role or creating that attitude where others want to follow than if you say, "Oh, I want to be a leader." What? What, what's that even mean? That's so vague. There has to be, like, going back to yourself. When I think about knowing you, how long I've known you, the things that how you are. Well, yes, you are a leader, but you are a leader because you are compassionate and hardworking. And even though I don't think you're necessarily super competitive with others, you are competitive with yourself. And
Absolutely.
there's a vast difference there. I think we have to be very cautious about when we say competitive. I myself, I am incredibly competitive with myself. Me. I'm not worried about what somebody else is doing. I'm worried about what I'm doing. So if like I'm competing and somebody else beats me, good for them. Good for them.
Yeah.
That
They got
doesn't
their own life, you know?
right, and that doesn't mean that I really want to emphasize this to people that are watching. If I am doing my best, my personal best, I am demonstrating leadership skills. I am doing the things that are helping me to be a better person that hopefully other people are seeing. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily better than somebody else. I think that's a very dangerous game that I see in many parts of society where we're always worrying about what somebody else is doing when we internally should be worrying about what we're doing. Like taking care.
Definitely.
That goes back to you again when in high school, in college. If I said to you, and I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot kind of quickly, but if I said to you, how many times throughout your career have you truly worried about what somebody else is doing? I'm guessing the answer is not very frequently.
Yeah, I mean, and it's definitely natural. Like you can't get mad at yourself. Like I was saying earlier with Goggins, like if you mess up, like you're a loser. So sure, sometimes it happens, but it's all about having a goal in mind. I think that you can use as like your recentering period where like if you feel yourself deviating a little bit, you kind of pull yourself back in. And I think for the most part, that's something that I've taught myself a lot to try to avoid. It's human nature. I can't say I've never done it. Going to um, changing circumstances and like moving from high school to college, you're dealing with new people, and it's natural initially to start to like think about other people, but then you realize very quickly that if you do that, you're going to be losing your way and not dialed into exactly what you need to do.
Yeah, and I think it's also it's okay to not be okay. you know,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, definitely.
we kind of live at both extremes in our world where like if you're not okay, oh my God, why aren't you okay? And then
Yeah,
if you're
short-term gratification in this world too. Like you got
right,
to focus a bit more than just the present.
right, if you're not like you know from all perspectives, whether it's leadership or otherwise, we I had this conversation the other day with somebody at the gym, and I was talking to them. You mentioned it a couple times about giving themselves grace. And a good friend of mine, a colleague, she always talks about truth and grace. You know, um, which I think is incredibly valuable from a standpoint of you should give yourself grace, but also be truthful. Like
Yeah, exactly. You can't
like
just lie to yourself that, I'm getting 1% better every day, but you're not, you know?
right. Wait, it's like saying to yourself, like, hey, you know what? I'm trying to lose weight, and I'm going to give myself grace, but now I'm going to have 5 donuts.
Too
you know,
much grace, too much grace.
like way too much grace, not enough truth.
Yeah,
See,
exactly. That's
you
not
got
to
to
say
be
if you go off the rails one day, but like you pull it back in a little, build some momentum. Yeah, yeah, agreed.
yeah, that can be difficult, and I think that's difficult for all of us. I mean, even myself, who's 58 years of age. Um, I take a step back and realize that I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to mess up, but they don't define me. Like one mistake or two mistakes, they don't define who I am as a person, nor do they define you or anybody. Now, again, obviously, it's going to be the level of mistakes that you're making. If I say something to hurt somebody by accident, or even if I'm angry and it's intentional, that doesn't make me a bad person. It means I slipped up. you know,
Yeah,
I think I think
absolutely.
I think we have to be very careful about look at the levels of things. Like there's levels of right and there's levels of wrong, and we are for most of us we're going to be in that continuum of going up and down. And
Yeah.
you want to be a lot more. You want to do a lot more things right than wrong. Not I think that's really important. I know throughout all of our experience, you've always kind of been like that. You've always been like a person who does the right thing, I guess, because you think it's the right thing to do, or maybe it's just who you are.
Appreciate that.
It's true
Yeah,
though.
I think that kind of ties into a bit of having an idea of moral compass, contract with yourself. But I think you said so many things that my mind is like running crazy that I like want to mention something. That's probably why usually when we have our chats, we got a lot, maybe 5 hours instead of however much time we're giving ourselves today.
Right.
It's a bit dangerous sometimes, but it's great that there's only so few people in the world. I feel like that we can have these like these lengthy conversations about these types of topics with. We just and genuinely like enjoy it. But you're gonna find a whole list of them and bring them on the podcast. So I'm looking forward to tuning in to many more. But one of the things that you mentioned was increments, realistic goals, and I think that's so huge. Like I think at least nowadays a good amount about like AI just kind
hmm
of in like what I being like a new professional, it's something that I'm thinking about a lot. And one of the things that Sam Altman, the guy who's the founder, like I don't know exactly, I guess he's CEO of OpenAI right now, mentions is that humans tend to like overestimate what can happen in the short term, and this is maybe more from like a macro perspective of like new technology and like how it will influence society. They overestimate like the short term impact, but vastly underestimate the long-term impact.
hmm
And I think that applies to so many different things in life. Like like you mentioned, if you go gung ho thinking like, okay, I'm gonna become a pro golfer like as soon as possible in the next like 3 months. Like obviously, maybe if you've never golfed before, like dial it back a little bit, buddy. Like focus on the incremental steps. But long term, you probably can do it if you decide that that's what you want to do and you take the steps that are the prerequisites to achieve that goal, then you can do it. And like maybe some people underestimate what they can achieve in long term. And I guess like anecdotally for me, just speaking about my high school college experience, like I came into high school not the most confident in the beginning. Like I didn't have the most confidence in middle school. I was very focused on academics when that was a time when people are starting to notice popularity and focus on
hmm
maybe hanging out in the area of our school district where people were getting to meet people from like one middle school would meet people from the other middle school and kind of get to know each other before high school, and that was what they were focused on. And I was maybe a little bit more nerdy, focused on like what test was coming up in science class, and kind of like resented the impact that that had on myself socially. And so I didn't feel like super in tune with the social aspect of things going into high school. But um, I came in with the goal that I wanted to get involved in things, and I wasn't going to be president of the school, first day of school, for instance, or I wasn't going to like be the type of person to say hi to every single person that I saw in the hallway, senior or freshman, my very first day in high school. But making that agreement with myself that I wanted to take the initial steps to sometimes you don't even know like what impact it's going to have on you, but like generally what the right thing to do is, and you embark on that journey. Like, and you don't know like what it will do for you, what challenges you might have. Like you were saying, when you're lifting and like all of a sudden now you're sick, you have a new challenge and barrier, and you can't predict from the get-go what the end will look like, but you can kind of set out to embark on that journey in small increments. And so I sucked it up and decided that I was going to run for class officer my freshman year. And like I think I was mentioning, like with the smile, I don't know if that was before or during the podcast, but where I was told that I was like going to record a speech and the lights were bright and I was the
You said
lady
that.
from BWTV. Yeah, exactly. So um, that was the beginning, and kind of just started from there, joining new clubs, meeting new people, becoming comfortable with upperclassmen. Um, and that all gave me more confidence in everything in life. I feel like that helped me in my academics. I felt more confident, for instance, asking questions in class that maybe some students were too shy to do in front of other students. And I used to come in with post-it notes on my folder, one for each class, and
Of course you
looking like the
did.
nerdiest person. But I didn't care. Like I didn't worry what people thought about me, especially like as I started putting myself in these situations where I felt comfortable socially, didn't worry at that point what people were thinking of me, and it allowed me to focus on my own goals without worrying about other people, comparing myself, all the points that we've kind of touched on. That
Yeah,
was
that's
a long way of answering a question that you might have not even asked.
that's okay. I think that's tough though. That's so difficult. And again, like I see it as a high school teacher, but not even just. I would say not even just at the high school level. I see it with people in general. It's difficult to um to not worry about what others are thinking. I also think that to put yourself out there is challenging. It just takes lots of practice, to do that and not be afraid because no matter what, we are human beings and we are going to be swayed by others at times, no matter what. Just, and that goes
100%.
for the the most powerful leaders in the world and us. We're all going to be swayed. That's the human emotion. That's who we are as people. There's nothing we're going to be able to do about that. I guess what I'd ask you to do to close is to kind of say, like, if there was something that you would say, maybe a few things to say to people to kind of help inspire them to be their best selves, what would you say to them?
I think I think you kind of teed that up perfectly for me because the advice that I would give, and this is honestly what I would say, not trying to give the lazy answer that you just set me up for, but is definitely get outside of your comfort zone because, and yeah, maybe it can sound a bit cliche. Outside your comfort zone is where all of the growth happens, but it's very true. Like if you just go throughout life and do exactly what you're used to doing, nothing new is going to happen. Try something new, put yourself out there, speak to new people. Going maybe keeping a high school person in mind. Um, try a new class, say hi to somebody new, try to join a new club. Um, and that applies in all things in life. Like translating that to college, there are going to be new things that you can try. Going to different social setting or putting yourself in a competition that you might not feel like you're going to succeed in, but and maybe you don't win the first time. Maybe that's not even the goal. Maybe it's just like to get in front and present or to teach yourself about whatever the competition is about. And that's how you incrementally grow, is just by taking that initial step. And sometimes that could just mean like making a split second decision to speak up, where you tell yourself 5 seconds of courage, like, okay, I'm going to do it without
Oh,
thinking about it. Or it could be a longer term thing where like you sign up for something and then do the do the daily activity that you need to do to prepare yourself for that. But it pays dividends long run in the future. And so I think I'll end it there, but
yeah.
definitely expand your comfort zone.
And I would I'll kind of just piggyback and kind of just basically say that this, without copying Blake, is I'm going to take his last thing because I think that's really powerful. For people that are watching, You know, if you're trying to improve your life in some way, really it does start with trying to get out of your comfort zone. I think that's a huge factor for any of us. Me personally, as somebody who is fortunate enough to be willing to put myself out there, I'm not inherently the kind of person who worries too much about what people think. I know Blake is the same way. I feel like when we put ourselves out there in positive ways, where we give ourselves a chance to be successful, again, I think that's incredibly critical. Is if you put yourself out there in ways that will give you a chance to be successful initially, those are game changers. Because if you don't do that, and let's say your goals are too high, too lofty, and you struggle, it becomes very easy to quit. That goes for any habits, anything that we try to develop. So I encourage you to put yourself out there. Think about your moral compass. Be somebody who lifts other people up and not put them down. Be the person that is making our world a better place through your actions, your words, and the things that you do. I want to say thank you to Blake, my good buddy, who is, again, somebody who I have so much respect for. I hope you got a lot out of listening to him because he is not only bright, he's wise, funny, and as a young person at 23, I think if you listen to the stuff that he said, even me just listening to it, being on with him, it gives me so much pride that somebody so young is so wise. And he's a great man as well. So, for those of you who want to be on Cutting the Crap with Shap, I'd love to have you. And again, you picked up hopefully from today. The experience is going to be something positive. We can share different thoughts, different ideas, and different opinions, and doing it in a way that is meaningful and uplifting without attacking each other. So, Blake, thank you again, brother. You're the man. Any final closing words?
I thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure. I always enjoy speaking with you, but this is extra special, you know. It's a huge honor being on the debut episode. I think this was great. I'd love to do it again sometime. I feel like we have so many topics left to discuss. But all the things I was going to cut you off. You're saying too many nice things about me, and I could say exactly the same about you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you were highly influential in who I feel like I've become, and so I'd like to thank you for that. And just keep being you, and wish this podcast much success and luck, and just spreading the message that I've been fortunate to hear. Many more people have, I think, can benefit from hearing all the great things that you have to offer.
Thank you, Blake. Everybody, hey, listen, we're always going to kind of finish our podcast with some kind of quote. So this is the first one, and every single podcast will be a different quote. And this one is pretty simple. Choose happy. Everybody have a great day. Thanks again for all you do.